Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, AmaRouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of feeling safe by way of the vagus nerve. So for anyone that doesn't know, the vagus nerve is a large nerve. Sometimes people call it the wandering nerve, and it travels from your brain to your heart and actually into the systems of your digestive organs, so into your digestive system as well. And often, well, little side note, when we talk about gut instinct and things like that and really being led by your gut, we're often referring to the nervous system that is there in that part of your body. And so it's really important that we're aware of the vagus nerve and our nervous system and how we can, one, have a really flexible nervous system, and also understanding where we sit at different times in space, i.e., are we in homeostasis, which is the most kind of balanced state within our nervous system where we feel safe, we feel comfortable, we feel held, we feel calm, we feel secure? Are we in fight or flight, which is at the other extreme end, where we're either getting ready to fight or we're getting ready to flee because we don't feel safe? Or are we in freeze, which is at the other end, to the other extreme, where we're paralyzed almost by our feeling of being unsafe? And this idea of safe spaces being really necessary for undoing really ties into how we feel within ourselves and how that's reflected in our nervous system. So being aware of what triggers us and what allows us to feel safe is really, really important, and being able to tune into those feelings and go, yes, actually, like Ella just said in her story, she felt really safe in that space, which meant her nervous system was in a place of homeostasis, and she felt that she could be vulnerable and she could be open, and that allowed her to open and start to unpeel layers and dive in and do some of the work that she needed to do, and work that she didn't even realize she needed to do to get closer to who she really is. And so that awareness of our nervous system and having a flexible nervous system is really important in how safe we feel. And how safe we can feel. And I came across an Instagram post by a person called Jordie Slonim, and I hope that I'm pronouncing their name correctly. We will, as always, tag their details in the show notes. And this Insta post was all around the vagus nerve and the idea of seeing and being seen. And I found it super, super interesting and insightful. And it raised some really important things for me that I realized I needed to address, and some ways of seeing that I hadn't previously seen, which I'll touch on at the end. Identity in the nervous system. My queerness and gender queerness is not solely about my gender identity and sexual identity. I live a queer existence. It is part of my identity. I live a queer life. The default we exist in is to see and hear me as cisgendered and heteronormative. I am neither of those things. The vagus nerve is part of the nervous system. Metaphysically, it is about feeling safe to see and be seen. The default for me is to find pockets of a sense of safety to see and be seen, spaces where my vagus nerve feels safe to stay in flow with my queerness, to be seen as who I am, not as what was projected onto me at birth and what is projected as the norm via legislation, policy, the media, TV, movies, cis heteronormativity. If I don't feel safe to see and be seen, my nervous system sends signals that I need to find a way to survive. In a fight response, I may become enraged, defensive, lash out. In a flight response, I may avoid, withdraw, hide. In a freeze response, I may go into shame and disassociation. They're there, but not really there. In a fawn response, I may go into people pleaser mode, trying to make sure everyone else is okay. I disconnect from my queer body and my queer emotions, thoughts, behaviours in an effort to survive. Connecting with them is dangerous. The bulk of messaging is that it is not safe for us to connect with our queerness. The vagus nerve is a wanderer, a seeker. I seek out those spaces that provide an ambient sense of belonging for my queerness, spaces that take action towards inclusivity and welcoming. A simple action of including pronouns in email signatures, social media bios, included with your name for Zoom meetings in all spaces. Let's make that a default. This would be a start.
Wow. I just love this quote, Amma. It's so powerful on so many levels. Like having fight, flight, freeze, fawn described in those details. I'm sure that listeners are also experiencing this. I could just instantly pick out moments when I've done all of those different
Same.
states and just was like, wow, yes. And how often, actually, how common it is for us to be in that state of, I'm going to call it mild trauma,
Yeah.
but perhaps it might be more extreme trauma, but that how easy it is to get into one of those states triggered by something that happens or even by a thought.
Yeah. Or by a comment that someone makes.
Mm.
One of the key things I took away, I think, from what Jordie says, well, I've taken a lot away, but what really sticks out at me is one of the last things they say, which is that they seek out spaces that provide an ambient sense of belonging for their queerness. And I
Mm.
feel that that can be applied, with a host of different words inputted alongside queerness.
Absolutely.
I think it really speaks to how integral those spaces are, how necessary
Mm.
they are. You
Yeah.
know?
It's also speaking to, we've spoken before about my having a not belonging belief or an imposter syndrome belief,
Yeah,
and how, yeah, I suppose like a need for these places where it's okay to be whoever you are.
exactly.
Um, yeah, to just feel welcome.
Just as you.
Mm.
And the last sentence actually had me really thinking this reference to a simple action of including pronouns in email signatures, social media bios, included with your name for Zoom meetings in all spaces. Let's make that a default, that this would be a start. And it really got me thinking about my effectively my choice not to do that. I hadn't chosen to do that yet. And I hadn't chosen to include my pronouns in my email signature, on my Instagram account, for example, on my Zoom, because in my mind I was like, well, most people who know me know my pronouns, and the pronouns they've been using to refer to me are the pronouns I identify with. So I didn't feel that there was a need for me to overtly state what my pronouns are. And then I thought the people who don't know me, most of them I will interact with. So they will hear how I refer to myself and they will recognize what my pronouns are. However, I realized from reading Jordie's post and specifically that last sentence that by not including my pronouns, I was actually feeding this idea of the default that actually, well, they'll assume that my pronouns are the default, and they're right. But actually, I didn't realize I was kind of feeding the monster, if you see what I mean. I'm not
Mm.
including my pronouns. I was feeding the idea of the default, as opposed to pronouns may be this, 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 or this. And actually, it's your responsibility to state them, because
Yeah.
there is no default. So that reading that post actually made me go, oh, it is important that I actively assert my pronouns, because otherwise I'm part of the problem, whether I'm trying to be so or not, I am. So actually, how do I do the opposite? So that was really insightful for
Yes.
me. So
It's
thank you,
another
Jordie.
example of Amma the good ally, like going back to what we were talking about, learning and making mistakes.
Yeah,
That's such a good demonstration of learning, and not only like, learning and understanding that it's okay to make the mistakes, but instantly going, right, well, how can I be a good ally? What do I need to learn? What do I need to change?
yeah,
And I suppose that's what we're all doing, isn't it, on this journey, is learning how fast can our reactions be to the learning that we're provided with.
yeah. And then also going forward, how can I continue to build on that? How can I continue to learn more,
Mm,
around what I don't really know? So
yeah.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
thank you for providing me with this safe space where I feel I can share. And as cheesy
Yeah.
as that sounds, it's very true.
Woo. Oh, I'm so happy. Speaking of that, I had a beautiful friend who, we had like a group Zoom call. This call involved people in different countries all coming together, who probably we wouldn't have done if it wasn't for these changes in the world.
Yeah.
So we got together. There was Portugal, Greece, UK in the house, and one of that group told the group that they are now a they. They would like to be addressed as they, them.
Hmm.
It was interesting because, for a lot of people, like they hadn't actually heard about this before. So there was like that kind of being asked lots of questions, and
Hmm.
then this amazing human responding with answers and responses. But what I thought about was, like, it's really nice that they felt safe to speak in that space.
Yeah.
But then it felt to me that perhaps the people in that group, it was for them to go away and do the work, rather than thinking it was for that person to educate them on everything, and for it to be okay to just ask so many questions that,
Hmm.
were, I guess, at moments just like cringy questions. It was like, really, do you not know that, or have you not done your own work already?
Yeah.
And not to, like, I'm not in any way disrespecting, because they're all amazing human beings in that space, but yeah, it just made me think about that, of like,
Where is
this is
the
a safe
line?
space because it was a friendship circle. So what it made me think was, whose responsibility is it to educate? Should it be that person that has done that learning for themselves and made that decision about who they are?
Hmm.
Or should it be for us all to do the work, for us all to be a part of the change?
Yeah. I think it's understandable to ask questions about something that you don't understand, that you wish to understand more about, of course. But there's also a point where you have to recognize that the onus is now on you to go away and do your own learning. Um, so I think there's you as individuals, we all need to be sensitive enough to know when that moment is, and to not put that responsibility onto whoever it is, who's decided to share with us in that way.
Mm. Yeah, in that specific incident, it was also making me think about, like, what's my responsibility and how can I continue to help and to educate so it doesn't fall on that person.
Mm.
Um, and so one thing I did do was I sent like a little post that I'd found, like, just with different alternative ways to address someone, rather than, how we often say like guys or girls, or um but yeah, again, I suppose, like, reflecting back to what you said, like, I know I can do more. And as that person in whatever situation, it's a lonely place to be on your own. So how can we be a good ally?
I agree. And I think once you start to recognize that and realize that the responsibility is on all of us, the concept of change becomes less about change and more about evolution and a collective responsibility.
I love that.
Talking about evolution of self and stepping into responsibility and a collective responsibility in your consciousness of that makes me think of this time that I went for dinner with my partner in a pub in the New Forest. And we were away for his birthday, and it was part of his birthday surprise. So we went for an early dinner, and I'd booked it all in advance. And we walked into this pub, and straight away I was aware that I was the only black person in the pub. I was the only brown-skinned person in the pub, non-white person. And it's something I'm always aware of if I step into a space and I'm the only person who looks like me or who is a different shade. And it didn't bother me, but I was aware of it, naturally. And two things happen, I think, when when I find myself in that situation. One, I realize straight away that I have unintentionally and unwillingly become the representation for all black women everywhere,
Yeah.
or all black women in the UK at least, without choosing to be. And then I've become um, the representative for all people who have locks because I have locks. So straight away, that's also like another layer. And then I've unwillingly become the representative for all black people, and it's like, and I'm like, well, I haven't actually chosen to be any of these things. I'm actually just stepping in here as me,
Yeah.
as Amma. But I know from an external perspective, being the only person in that space who looks like me, automatically, whatever I do, say, the way I behave becomes a definition for every other black person, every other black identifying female, every other black person with locks, so that's something I've always been aware of. And the reason I laughed as I was explaining this, because it's so, to me, it's such a ridiculous definition to put on one person. It's such a ridiculous responsibility for one person to hold that it's almost laughable to me now. Yeah. So that's one thing. And that's just making me think about spaces and what we were talking about in prior about feeling comfortable in spaces and feeling safe in spaces. And, I never, definitely as an adult, I can't recall ever feeling like I shouldn't be in a space. I'm very aware that there are some people who feel that maybe I shouldn't be in certain spaces when I'm in them, but I never feel like, oh, I better leave. For example, like this pub, I didn't feel like, oh, I better get out because I'm the only person who looks like this and therefore I'm not welcome or I don't feel comfortable. It's like, well, I have every right to be here and have a meal with my partner just as everyone else. And I love that I feel that way. And I love that, maybe even if I was in a situation where I did feel a little bit like, maybe I shouldn't be here, I feel like there's a part of me that would just always push back and be like, well, I'm definitely gonna be here even more. I'm gonna take up even more space to counteract that. All of that said, it then, what became really apparent once we started having dinner was that actually there was someone who definitely felt I shouldn't be in the space, and it was well, there were two people, and there were a couple who were older than us. They were sitting right next to us, and they kept peering over, especially the woman. She kept looking. She kept looking directly at me and at us with this kind of disapproving, disgruntled look. And every time I looked back at her, she would either hold my gaze for a little bit and then turn her head, or she'd turn her head straight away, as if she'd been caught. and and I just thought, can I help you? Like, is there something I can help you with? Because if not, you need to stop directing your gaze in our direction, or you need to speak to us. Maybe she was admiring how amazing my locks were. I don't know. But until you talk to me, love, I haven't got a clue. I mean, we discerned that, yeah, she was uncomfortable with us being there and being so close to her table and, to her having her meal with who I assume was her husband from their interactions or her partner. And it just made me think, well, sorry, tough. This is actually time for you to evolve and to take ownership over your consciousness and your idea and realization of collective community. It's not my responsibility to take myself out of this space so you feel comfortable. It's actually your responsibility to recognize that I'm a human being just like anyone else. And there's not something innately different about me because my skin's however many shades darker than yours. And I have every right to exist in this space.
I grew up in a really small town in the south of England, but this was the 80s. And it actually is reminding me of experiences from the 80s. And we're talking about now, right?
Wow.
When was this?
Yeah, we're talking about last year.
Right. So I feel like for myself and probably the listeners as well, we kind of want to know that you were okay. What happened next? Like how did your partner react?
Yeah, well, well, I'm just laughing because it's so ridiculous to me that I just, it's one of those ones where I'm like, really, I'm making you so uncomfortable you can't enjoy your meal. And if anything, all I'm going to do is spread myself out further, wider and deeper then. So my partner was getting really annoyed as well with the constant looks, and the constant disgruntlement. And I said to him, just ignore it, let's just enjoy our meal. I'm so used to this kind of experience from a young child that I was just like, ugh, I don't even have the energy to entertain this nonsense. Let's just get on with what we're here for. And actually it's her work to do. So let her recognize that. He asked me afterward, he said, can I ask you something? And I said, yes. And he said, do you feel when you come into a space like this where you're the only Black person or, the only brown person, non-white person in the space, do you acutely feel that? Are you aware of that? And I said, yes. Yes, I am. That is something I'm definitely aware of immediately. As I said at the top of this story, straight away I'm aware that I'm automatically representative for Black people in the UK, whether I want to be or not, et cetera, et cetera. And I said that to him. It's something he recognized that he would probably not experience ever in his life, if much, as a white male.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was great to be in the space, exist in the space, completely as me, completely as us, and then also have a really frank discussion afterward.
Do you think there should be, like how you have the list of paedophiles, the list of racist people that can be in a restaurant having these horrible thoughts about another human being? Should there be a racist list?
That is a massive question.
I feel like your partner is perhaps an example of a good ally, and
Yes.
that really gives me hope for the future. And like linking back to what we spoke about Martin Luther King and this, like, we need to, if we're going to really make the change, then we have to do it with compassion, without anger inside of us, even though these situations can make us so angry, to really kind of move forwards with that compassion and that keeping our eye and our focus on what we're hopeful for the future in the world that we want to see.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am AmaRouge.
And we are PowerUp Podcast.